This is ridiculous. I will not be spoken to like this. You obviously have no idea who I am, and I demand that you dismiss this case immediately.
The television courtroom had never witnessed such pure, unfiltered entitlement from someone whose bank account had convinced her she was completely untouchable. Elena Vance, the 9-year-old wife of A-list Hollywood actor Julian Vance, stood before Judge Judy with the kind of diamond-dripping arrogance that could only come from years of never hearing the word no. Armed with a $500 million net worth and wearing $3,000 Christian Louboutin heels, Elena didn't just walk into the courtroom, she paraded into it like she owned the building, the air, and everyone breathing it. She belonged to a social stratosphere where the law wasn't a set of rules, but merely a mild inconvenience meant for other, lesser people. She had absolutely no idea that in her 25 years on the bench, Judge Judy had stared down thousands of bullies, just like her people who mistakenly believed a heavy checkbook could buy another human being's dignity. The defining moment arrived when Elena, her face twisted in a mask of absolute contempt, raised her perfectly manicured hand. Her finger, heavy with a 10-carat diamond engagement ring worth more than a lifetime of honest work, pointed directly at Judge Judy. The words that spilled from her filler-enhanced lips would soon become the permanent eulogy for her privileged life. You clearly are confusing your position with mine, Judge. Do you have any idea who my husband is? You think this little courtroom of yours can impose rules on someone like me? If you had even a fraction of my wealth, you'd know better than to speak to me this way. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the terrifying, heavy silence that precedes a Category 5 hurricane. Judge Judy's eyes narrowed into the legendary death stare that had made high-powered corporate attorneys sweat through their tailored suits. A slight, almost imperceptible smile appeared at the corners of her mouth, a universal signal to longtime viewers that someone was about to be absolutely obliterated. But what was about to happen in the next 60 seconds wouldn't just be a stern television reprimand. It was going to expose an underground criminal conspiracy, a system of exploitation so horrific that it would bring the Vance Hollywood empire crashing down in flames. Sitting across from this monster was Sarah Jennings, a 62-year-old former personal assistant who had dedicated 8 years of her life to the Vance family. Sarah stood clutching the wooden podium, her weathered hands trembling, her tired eyes carrying the heavy burden of someone who had been treated like a disposable object. She wasn't just suing for $50,000 in withheld wages. She was fighting to reclaim her humanity. Elena fully expected her husband's PR machine and ruthless legal attack dogs to crush Sarah like an insect. What Elena's blinding arrogance prevented her from seeing was that Judge Judy had spent the entire previous week quietly coordinating with federal agents to unearth a dark secret Elena had successfully buried for a decade. This was no longer a simple civil dispute. It was the beginning of an irreversible downfall. Elena Vance wasn't born into Hollywood royalty, but she adapted to its darkest, most toxic elements with terrifying ease. Before marrying Julian Vance 12 years ago, she was a struggling wardrobe assistant, someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be invisible and overworked. But instead of developing empathy, her sudden ascent to unimaginable wealth turned her into a predator. As Julian's star rose, bringing in massive movie deals and lucrative endorsements, Elena's ego metastasized. She became notorious in elite Hollywood circles, not for her charity work, but for her absolute cruelty towards service workers, estate managers, and assistants. She treated non-disclosure agreements like standard greeting cards, using them to trap her employees in a web of legally binding silence while she inflicted daily psychological torture. Over a decade, she had cycled through dozens of personal assistants, leaving a trail of shattered confidence and ruined careers, all neatly covered up by her husband's high-priced legal fixers. But Sarah Jennings was different. Sarah was a seasoned professional who had managed households for deeply respectful families before taking the job with the Vances. She was promised a competitive salary, health benefits, and standard working hours. The reality, however, was a relentless, soul-crushing nightmare. Elena demanded Sarah be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If Sarah didn't answer her phone at 3 a.m. because Elena suddenly wanted a specific brand of imported sparkling water for an after-party, the verbal abuse would be catastrophic. Elena routinely mocked Sarah's age, her modest clothing, and her lack of a retirement fund, deliberately weaponizing the woman's financial vulnerability. "You're lucky I let you breathe the same air as my guests," Elena once hissed at her during a private gala. "Without my charity, you'd be bagging groceries." The absolute breaking point occurred just 6 months prior, when Sarah's husband was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. Desperate and exhausted from the emotional toll, Sarah quietly asked for 3 days of unpaid leave to accompany him to a critical, life-saving surgery. Elena's response was a masterclass in sociopathic entitlement. Not only did she flatly deny the request, stating that Julian's upcoming movie premiere was far more important than a minor medical hiccup, but she fired Sarah on the spot for gross insubordination and lack of loyalty. To twist the knife, Elena withheld Sarah's final 3 months of pay and her massively accumulated overtime, fabricating a story that Sarah had misplaced a piece of designer jewelry. She even threatened to have Sarah blacklisted from every domestic staffing agency in Los Angeles if she dared to complain. What Elena completely failed to realize was that Sarah, anticipating the betrayal, had been meticulously saving every threatening text message, every hostile voicemail, and every illegally altered time card. Sarah, left with a gravely ill husband, mounting medical bills, and absolutely zero income, refused to be just another silenced casualty of the Vance family machine. Driven by a quiet but unbreakable resolve, she took her meticulously organized files, years of threatening texts, illegally altered time cards, and secretly recorded audio of Elena's explosive rants to a pro bono employment clinic in downtown Los Angeles. The overworked attorney who initially reviewed her case expected a standard, albeit tragic, wage theft dispute. But as he dug deeper into the mountains of evidence Sarah had bravely preserved, his jaw dropped. This wasn't just a rich boss acting badly. This was a highly coordinated, illegal financial enterprise. Elena had been intentionally misclassifying full-time domestic workers as independent contractors to dodge payroll taxes, funneling off-the-books payments through Hollywood shell companies, and using interstate wire transfers to hide the illicit financial trail from the IRS. Furthermore, her documented threats to systematically destroy her employees' livelihoods if they dared to report her constituted severe federal extortion. Knowing that a standard civil lawsuit would be buried under years of brutal litigation and quietly silenced by Julian Vance's high-priced legal attack dogs, the attorney made a bold, unconventional move. He bypassed the traditional court system entirely and sent the explosive dossier directly to Judge Judy's producers. He knew that glaring sunlight was the best disinfectant, and public humiliation was the only currency a Hollywood elite like Elena Vance truly feared. When Judge Judy personally reviewed the file, her sharp legal mind immediately recognized the staggering gravity of the crimes. This was far beyond the jurisdiction of a small claims television show. Within 24 hours, she had securely transferred Sarah's entire evidence box to the FBI, the IRS, and the Department of Labor. For 3 weeks leading up to the taping, federal investigators worked feverishly behind the scenes, using Sarah's rock-solid documentation to subpoena bank records and unravel the Vance's illicit shadow payroll. They uncovered that Elena had systematically stolen over $3 million in unpaid overtime and evaded millions more in federal taxes over the past decade, leaving a trail of financially ruined workers in her wake. When the day of the courtroom taping finally arrived, the trap was set with terrifying precision. Undercover federal agents were already stationed in the production facility's backstage rooms, armed with a multi-count federal indictment and a freshly signed arrest warrant. Elena Vance strutted into the studio, expecting a quick, televised victory to stroke her massive ego. She had absolutely no idea that she was walking blindly into a federal sting operation, one that would be broadcast for the entire world to see. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with a palpable tension as Judge Judy slammed her gavel, officially opening the proceedings. She began with her signature, no-nonsense precision, laying out the facts of the lawsuit: a civil claim for $50,000 in unpaid wages, withheld overtime, and damages for wrongful termination. Elena Vance, draped in a custom-tailored white Valentino suit and exuding the toxic confidence of someone who had never been held accountable for her actions, took the floor first. Her opening statement was an absolute masterclass in narcissistic victim blaming. "Your Honor, this is simply a case of a greedy, disgruntled employee trying to extort my family's incredible generosity," Elena drawled, waving her diamond-clad hand dismissively. "We gave this woman a highly prestigious position, and she repaid us with sheer incompetence. She was constantly distracted by her personal drama, and quite frankly, it was embarrassing to have her around my high-profile guests. We had to let her go to protect the elite standard of our household." Every single word dripped with poison, carefully designed to diminish Sarah's worth and paint the billionaire's wife as the actual aggrieved party. Sarah Jennings took a deep breath, adjusting her stance at the plaintiff's podium. Her voice was quiet but laced with the undeniable, heavy ring of truth. She opened the meticulously organized manila folder containing the timeline of her abuse. She didn't yell or exaggerate. She simply let the cold, hard facts speak for themselves. She detailed the grueling 100-hour work weeks, the intentionally misclassified tax documents, and the vicious, degrading verbal attacks. But when she reached the day she was brutally fired, the day she tearfully begged for unpaid time off to sit by her husband's hospital bed before his critical cancer surgery, her voice finally broke. The courtroom audience sat in stunned, horrified silence as Sarah recounted how Elena had actually laughed at her, stating that medical emergencies were a pathetic excuse for people who didn't know how to manage their time. If Elena had possessed even a single shred of human decency, she would have remained silent. Instead, her reaction was the final, devastating nail in her own coffin. While Sarah wept softly on national television, Elena dramatically rolled her eyes, inspecting her flawless manicure and sighing loudly into the microphone. "Oh, please, spare us the cheap soap opera," Elena muttered, a cruel, satisfied smirk dancing on her lips. It was a display of apathy so profound and repulsive that it caused a collective, audible gasp from the gallery. Judge Judy didn't yell. She didn't bang her gavel to demand order. She simply leaned forward, her eyes locking onto the Hollywood wife with the terrifying, unblinking focus of an apex predator whose trap had just been sprung. The real interrogation was about to begin, and Elena Vance was about to learn that her husband's money couldn't shield her from the federal government. Judge Judy's voice cut through the lingering shock in the room, deliberately calm and meticulously sharp. "Mrs. Vance, let's discuss the financial mechanics of this so-called elite household. How exactly do you compensate your domestic staff? Are they W-2 employees, or do you use 1,099 contractor agreements?" Elena sighed, shifting her weight as if explaining basic arithmetic to a toddler. "We use a hybrid approach, Judge. Obviously, putting everyone on a standard payroll is a bureaucratic nightmare. I run my household staff through my husband's production company, Vance Entertainment, as independent creative consultants. It saves us a fortune in pesky payroll taxes and benefits. It's just smart business. Frankly, you wouldn't understand." Judge Judy didn't blink. The trap had been laid, and the mouse had just cheerfully sprinted right into it. "I see," Judge Judy replied, her tone dangerously even. "So you are publicly admitting to misclassifying personal domestic workers as corporate consultants to fraudulently claim business tax deductions while simultaneously evading federal employment taxes." Elena's arrogant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before her entitlement roared back to the surface. "Don't twist my words into some legal mumbo-jumbo. That's how things are done in Hollywood. My accountants handle the details. Besides, I don't pay people who steal from me. Sarah misplaced a very expensive diamond necklace. She's lucky I only kept her last few paychecks instead of ruining her entire miserable life. Did you file a police report regarding this alleged felony theft?" Judge Judy pressed, her eyes boring into the wealthy socialite. Elena let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Police reports? Please. I don't waste my time with the LAPD over petty grievances. I have my husband's security team handle our problems." I simply withheld what she owed me and reminded her that if she ever spoke out, our lawyers would ensure she never found work in the state of California again. It's called leverage, Judge. The entire gallery sat frozen, horrified by the casual, breathtaking brazenness of the admission. Elena Vance was so insulated by her immense wealth and so blinded by her own narcissism that she didn't even realize she had just confessed to felony extortion, corporate fraud, and systemic tax evasion into a live microphone. She genuinely believed her status made her immune to the laws governing the rest of society. "So, you accused her of a major crime to justify wage theft, failed to report it to the authorities, and then threatened her livelihood to ensure her silence," Judge Judy summarized, picking up a thick, red-stamped federal evidence folder from her desk. "That is a fascinating definition of leverage, Mrs. Vance." Elena crossed her arms, her diamond bracelets clinking loudly in the quiet room. "I'm not going to stand here and be interrogated about my finances by a daytime television judge. My husband's attorneys will have your job for this." Judge Judy did not flinch. The threat of high-priced Hollywood lawyers was like a mosquito buzzing against a reinforced steel vault. She slowly opened the thick, red-stamped federal evidence folder on her desk, flattening the pages with deliberate, agonizing precision. The silence in the studio was so absolute you could hear the subtle hum of the television cameras capturing every millisecond of the billionaire wife's impending destruction. "Let me explain exactly what my job entails, Mrs. Vance," Judge Judy began, her voice dropping to that terrifyingly quiet register that sent shivers down the spines of the studio audience. "My job is to ensure that predators like you do not get to use their bank accounts as a shield against the laws of the United States. You see, this isn't just a small claims dispute anymore. For the past 21 days, special agents from the FBI, the IRS, and the Department of Labor have been meticulously analyzing your smart business practices." The color rapidly drained from Elena's perfectly contoured face. The smug, condescending sneer was suddenly replaced by the wide-eyed, frantic realization of a trapped animal. She gripped the edge of the defendant's podium, her knuckles turning bone white as the gravity of the situation began to crash down on her. "We have hours of crystal-clear audio recordings of your extortionate threats," Judge Judy continued relentlessly, holding up a small USB drive that caught the studio lights. "We have the illegally altered time cards. We have the wire transfer receipts proving you funneled off-the-books cash through shell companies to evade millions in federal taxes. You haven't just committed simple wage theft, Mrs. Vance. You have been operating a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise heavily reliant on the systemic abuse and labor trafficking of vulnerable workers." It was in that precise moment that Elena's fragile, narcissistic reality completely shattered. Decades of unchecked privilege violently collided with the brick wall of federal accountability, and she absolutely lost her mind. She slammed both hands onto the podium and screamed, her voice echoing shrilly through the silent courtroom. "This is a setup. This is an illegal entrapment," Elena shrieked, her carefully maintained Hollywood composure disintegrating into pure, unhinged hysteria. She lunged forward, thrusting her arm out and pointing that massive 10-carat diamond ring directly at Judge Judy's face, the exact moment of fatal disrespect the world would soon watch millions of times. "You are nothing but a jealous, washed-up daytime television hack. You cannot do this to me. I am Elena Vance. I am untouchable. I am leaving this pathetic circus right now." Judge Judy didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at the screaming, unraveling billionaire's wife, gave a subtle nod toward the back of the courtroom, and delivered the final blow. "You aren't going anywhere, Mrs. Vance." The heavy oak doors at the back of the studio swung open with a resounding thud that echoed like a final judgment. 3 federal agents, 2 from the FBI and 1 from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, strode down the center aisle. They weren't wearing the glamorous, tailored suits of Hollywood fixers. They wore the uncompromising, dark windbreakers of the federal government, with bold yellow letters that instantly sucked the remaining oxygen out of the room. The studio audience, previously stunned into silence, erupted into a chaotic symphony of gasps, whispers, and scattered applause. They were no longer just watching a television show. They were witnessing the real-time execution of moral and legal justice against a woman who had terrorized the working class for over a decade. Elena Vance froze. The diamond-clad finger she had aggressively pointed at Judge Judy slowly lowered, her perfectly manicured hand beginning to tremble uncontrollably. The blinding arrogance that had shielded her from reality, her entire adult life shattered into a million irreparable pieces. She looked frantically from the approaching agents to Judge Judy, her eyes wide with a primal, visceral terror. For the first time in her privileged existence, Julian Vance's money, his elite PR team, and his ruthless lawyers were absolutely useless. She couldn't buy her way out of a federal sting operation broadcast to millions. Elena Vance, the lead FBI agent, announced, his voice projecting with a practiced, unshakable authority as he stepped up to the defendant's podium. He reached to his belt, the metallic clink of steel handcuffs cutting through the murmurs of the breathless crowd. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, systemic tax evasion, and federal labor trafficking." "No, no, you can't touch me. This is insane," Elena shrieked, backing away until her spine hit the wooden partition. Her voice lost all its cultivated Hollywood smoothness, breaking into a guttural, desperate sob. "Julian, call Julian. He will have all of your badges for this." "Do you know who we are?" "We know exactly who you are, Mrs. Vance," the agent replied calmly, expertly catching her flailing wrist. He twisted her arms behind her back with swift, uncompromising efficiency. Her custom-tailored white Valentino suit wrinkled violently as the cold, heavy steel snapped shut around her wrists. The sound of the handcuffs clicking into place was the loudest sound in the world, a definitive, metallic, full stop to a decade of unchecked cruelty. You have the right to remain silent. Though given your track record, I highly suggest you finally start using it. The perp walk that followed instantly became the most satisfying, widely shared piece of television history ever recorded. Elena Vance, completely stripped of her untouchable aura, was paraded down the center aisle of the studio in her increasingly wrinkled Valentino suit. She was sobbing uncontrollably now, not out of genuine remorse for the working-class lives she had ruthlessly destroyed, but out of the sheer, terrifying realization that she was actually going to a federal prison. She desperately searched the faces of the studio audience for a single shred of sympathy, but all she found was an unbroken wall of disgust and a thunderous, spontaneous standing ovation honoring her immediate downfall. The heavy studio doors slammed shut behind her with a definitive thud, sealing her fate and locking her out of the gilded Hollywood reality she had weaponized for so long. With the billionaire's wife finally removed, the chaotic, electric energy in the room slowly settled into a profound, emotional silence. Judge Judy turned her attention back to the plaintiff's podium, her legendary steely gaze softening into a rare expression of deep respect. "Sarah," Judge Judy said, her voice carrying a gentle but firm authority, "this court formally rules in your favor for the maximum allowable civil amount. But far more importantly, the federal government has already frozen the Vance family's illicit accounts. You, and the dozens of other vulnerable workers she exploited, will receive full financial restitution through the Federal Victim Compensation Fund. Your husband's medical bills will be covered." Sarah collapsed against the wooden podium, burying her face in her trembling hands as years of suffocating stress, fear, and humiliation finally washed away in a flood of relieved tears. "She made me feel like I was absolutely nothing," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. Judge Judy shook her head firmly. "No, Sarah. She tried to make you feel like nothing because she is entirely empty inside. Dignity is not something a billionaire can buy, and it is certainly not something they can steal from a hard-working woman like you. You stood up to a monster when no one else would, and today, you won." When the episode finally aired, the cultural impact was seismic. The exact frame of Elena pointing her massive diamond ring at Judge Judy before being hauled away in handcuffs shattered internet records, amassing hundreds of millions of views across every social media platform. The fallout in Hollywood was swift and merciless. Julian Vance's elite PR machinery immediately went into overdrive. Within 48 hours, he publicly denounced her actions and filed for divorce to salvage his own sinking box office career, leaving Elena to face the federal prosecutors completely alone. The wealthy socialites who had once attended her lavish Malibu parties instantly blocked her number. Elena Vance had spent her entire adult life believing that absolute power and unlimited wealth made her invincible. But in the end, she learned the hardest, most brutal lesson of all. When power inevitably fails, character is the only thing that remains. And hers had just guaranteed her a 15-year sentence in a federal penitentiary.